Welcome to the Containment Zone. You've entered a place where form and purpose twist in quiet rebellion, where walls forget their beginnings, and staircases spiral toward nowhere. The anomaly cataloged as SCP-184 does not roar, does not bleed, does not reach for you with claws. And yet, in its presence, reality itself begins to soften, like wet plaster under a sculptor's hand. It is known as the Architect, and to study it is to lose the shape of your thoughts. There is a chamber, buried beneath the lower strata of Site-37, whose measurements no longer hold. The blueprints say it is 6 meters by 4. The surveillance cameras confirm this, until they don't. An intern who stepped in to repair a loose tile on the ceiling found herself wandering for over 3 hours before collapsing against a stone archway that hadn't existed prior to entry. The footage captured her exiting just 31 seconds after walking in. The Foundation has stopped correcting the architectural drafts. They've accepted that the chamber is no longer a room. It's a suggestion, a habit the building is trying to unlearn. The object at the center, SCP-184, is nothing more than a small metallic sphere, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, its surface etched with a pattern that no hand claims to have carved. Its design resembles a city viewed from above, but the streets shift when you blink. The longer you stare, the more it resembles your own neighborhood, until it doesn't. It was found embedded in the wall of an abandoned monastery in western Siberia, wrapped in linen and mortar, hidden within the curvature of an otherwise perfect dome. The structure had no entrance, no exit, only the sound of wind spiraling through non-existent halls. Upon first contact, personnel noted unusual spatial anomalies, doorways duplicating themselves, furniture melting into walls, voices echoing from floors above that did not exist. One researcher described the sensation as being watched by the room itself, as if the space had dreams and I was waking inside them. Initial attempts to move SCP-184 resulted in minor distortions. The object remained inert, but its presence lingered. Entire storage wings began to extend their own corridors. Hallways sprouted alcoves that folded into themselves. A janitorial closet, once no larger than a coffin, was found to contain a full library, complete with mezzanine and dust. They named it the Architect, not because it builds, but because it compels. It whispers in angles, it breathes in dimensions, and its influence does not rest. It simply rearranges until the space it inhabits forgets what it was. Researchers describe the phenomenon with a kind of reverence, as if SCP-184 is not simply distorting geometry, but liberating it. They speak of potentiality, of form unbound by form, of a structure allowed to dream of its own body. One report refers to it as the hymn of Euclid unspoken. One assistant vanished for 3 days after a brief exposure. She returned in silence, skin pale and eyes sunken. When questioned, she described being between walls that never touched, and hearing the sound of footsteps that always stopped just before turning the corner. She has not spoken since, and somewhere in that lower chamber, the object continues to hum, not audibly, but psychically, a low architectural pulse that resonates through steel beams and muscle fiber alike. The Architect is not violent. It does not kill. It simply remakes. And in its presence, the world forgets that it was ever whole. They called it Spiral A184, though the term was retroactive. At the time, there was no incident, only a set of subtle observations filed beneath routine structural reports. A wall creaked, a pipe rerouted itself. A crawl space appeared behind the vending machine in sublevel 3 and vanished before maintenance arrived. Nothing dramatic, nothing overt, just a pressure, a presence, like something leaning against the blueprint of the facility. Site-37's lead surveyor, Dr. Kendrick, submitted 3 different blueprints for the East Wing over the course of a single month. None matched. He believed it was a drafting error. Then he began hearing construction noises in the middle of the night, hammers tapping gently against hollow concrete, the rasp of sandpaper where there were no workers assigned. His sleep fragmented. He placed a small recorder in his office overnight. It captured 42 minutes of silence, followed by the faint sound of whispers repeating the number 360 until the battery died. No one else heard them, but they kept changing the building anyway. Security logs from Spiral A184 show that over the course of 21 days, The east wing gained over 180 meters of undocumented corridor, most of it composed of new material, unsourced and unmapped. The lights dimmed after midnight. The elevators began descending below their designed limits. One door, marked Archivum, led to a pitch-black stairwell spiraling downward into nothingness. A D-class was sent down. He returned 90 seconds later, crying softly, hands bruised from gripping something too tightly. He never said what. What made this event particularly insidious was that no one knew it had begun. The alterations occurred with such surgical subtlety that they were interpreted as human error. Memos were sent to engineering. Structural reports were lost or redacted under unrelated headers. Nobody thought to connect the dots until personnel began to lose track of time and place. Researchers found themselves unable to navigate their own offices. Desks rotated away from their windows. Filing cabinets grew handles on the inside. One junior technician named Rorka walked into a janitor's closet and emerged into a lecture hall. He insisted he'd walked less than 3 meters. The hall in question had not existed on any floor plan. It was removed by the next day. By the time the Foundation recognized Spiral A184 for what it was, Site-37's floor plan had become a tapestry of architectural hallucination, parts of it real, parts of it unreal but no longer distinguishable. Cameras looped back to show the same hallway from impossible angles. Some areas emitted low frequencies that caused nausea and directional confusion. The building was no longer one building, it was becoming something else. The decision was made to isolate SCP-184 in a reinforced containment vault at sublevel Z1, with an internal space no larger than 4 meters in any direction, and lined with non-reflective, non-resonant black carbon composite. A rotating shift of personnel was placed on surveillance, each assigned no more than 45 minutes of exposure at a time. It was too late. Personnel began reporting feelings of déjà vu within 5 meters of the vault. Some described recurring dreams of spirals and staircases. Others heard architectural terminology whispered in dead languages. One officer was found at 02:00 a.m., staring into a vent, whispering, "It's drawing the hall again," over and over. And the vault itself, though measured daily, kept changing. One week, the floor became convex, the walls bowed. Another week, the air grew thinner. The sphere, SCP-184, remained motionless on its pedestal. But the chamber, the floor beneath it, the very air reshaped themselves as if trying to accommodate its desire. That's when they realized the object was not expanding. It was perfecting. Not building randomly, but sculpting. Not creating chaos, but refining the lie of geometry until it became sublime. Dr. Kendrick's final report was only a sentence long. It's not that the building is broken, it's that we no longer understand what a building is. He vanished 2 nights later. His office now contains an arched ceiling, 6 bookcases, a spiral staircase that leads to a locked hatch in the ceiling, and a window with no external counterpart. There are no records of any of these features being installed. And the only thing that remains consistent? The hum. That gentle, unending vibration, like something dreaming in cubes and lines. To call SCP-184 a spatial anomaly is to name a chasm by the sound it makes. The term satisfies protocol, yes, but it fails, utterly fails to grasp what this object truly is. It is not a tool. It is not an engine. It does not move. It does not signal. It does not seek. And yet, it unfolds the world around it with the precision of an invisible mind. Observation logs reveal something deeply unsettling. SCP-184's spatial distortions do not follow chaos, they follow intent. Patterns reappear, structures echo themselves. Rooms return in new positions, almost improved. Smoother walls, better proportions, more elegant symmetry. The entity, or influence, seems to be editing space like a sculptor carving toward perfection, or a writer redrafting a sentence. This refinement is not random. One researcher compared it to a language being written in architecture. Another proposed the theory that SCP-184 is attempting to model a memory, a perfect place that once existed, or perhaps never did, but which it nonetheless recalls with terrible intimacy, as if some being, somewhere, is dreaming of a house it cannot forget, and this sphere is how it remembers. What makes the phenomenon more disturbing is its gradual psychic seepage. Exposure to SCP-184 correlates strongly with identity erosion, not memory loss precisely, but a dislocation of self. Subject reports include, "I keep confusing where I end and the walls begin. There's a hallway in my dream that breathes. My house feels wrong now, like it's looking at me. I drew the same room 27 times last night, and it kept changing when I blinked." More than one long-term exposure subject claimed that the object had begun restructuring their memories, the way it restructures buildings, sanding edges, duplicating corners, inserting impossible bridges between events. Emotional moments begin to echo. Regrets loop like spiral staircases. The sense of chronology starts to rot, replaced by a kind of psychological topography. Memories folded into corners of the mind like tucked-away rooms. SCP-184 is not sentient, not in the traditional sense, but it operates with such nuanced correctional logic that many have questioned whether it is remembering something or designing something. If it is a memory, then whose? If it is a blueprint, then what structure is it recreating? And if it is neither, if it is simply a self-sustaining force, then what does it say about the universe that such a force exists? When placed within structures designed to be non-functional, impossible, Asherian geometries, paradoxical rooms with no floor or ceiling, the sphere continues to work. It corrects the impossible, makes it real. Shapes form from distortion, paths emerge where no doors were laid. It's not breaking reality, it's believing in it harder than we do. Dr. Naresh, an architectural philosopher assigned to study SCP-184, theorized the object was performing God's editing process, not in a theological sense, but in a cognitive one. "The architect," she wrote in a restricted memo, "is less a builder than a rememberer. It bends matter to its nostalgia, not for us, not for Earth, but for a place it once was, a geometry not born of this world." After 6 weeks in proximity to SCP-184, Dr. Naresh began exhibiting signs of pronounced spatial synesthesia. She could feel the angles of a room like music. She insisted that certain walls were singing. She claimed that stairs had moods, and hallways felt embarrassed when entered too quickly. Her final recording, made before her voluntary departure, ended with a whisper. "It's trying to build me from the inside out. I'm remembering a place I've never been." To date, she has not returned. Her apartment was found with the walls slightly widened, the bathroom relocated to the living room, and a narrow spiral tower protruding through the ceiling with no access point. All blueprints before her departure confirm her residence had been flat, one-story, and unremarkable. And through it all, SCP-184 remained still. A silent city dreaming inside a ball of metal, waiting for the world to remember what it's supposed to be. There is a street on the outskirts of New Haven that doesn't exist on city records. It appears only in memory and anecdote. The residents who recall it, none of whom live there anymore, insist it was somewhere near Longacre Avenue, but when shown maps, they simply point to empty lots or industrial zones. Still, they describe the houses in unison: pale green siding, black shutters, winding fences that doubled back on themselves. One woman, a retired music teacher, claims she lived there for over a year with her husband. Her official residency? An apartment 5 miles away. Her memories are vivid: summer barbecues, snow-heavy driveways, her husband sanding down warped steps every Saturday morning. "He always said the house was growing faster than he could repair it," she said, almost laughing, until her voice fell into silence. Her husband died in 2007. There is no record of the house she described, but her photo albums are filled with unfamiliar angles. Living rooms with 2 fireplaces, kitchens with doors leading to nowhere, and staircases captured mid-curve, unfinished in the air. The Foundation now classifies this area as a phantom residency zone, likely caused by the unsanctioned proximity of SCP-184 during a transit breach. One of the mobile containment teams reported a minor vehicular accident during relocation, a collision near a residential neighborhood. No damage was reported, no cleanup required, but within 2 weeks, 6 homes were abandoned by their owners, each claiming their house had become too complicated to live in. Descriptions included hallways that looped until exhaustion, windows that refused to show the same view twice, voices heard from upstairs when no second floor existed, drawers that extended for meters, filled with irrelevant possessions, family heirlooms from strangers, photographs taken from impossible angles, children's toys that no one recognized but insisted were just familiar enough. One boy went missing for 17 minutes inside his own closet. When recovered, he was covered in dust and described a room filled with clocks, all ticking slightly wrong. He was never able to reproduce a drawing of the space, claiming, "It gets smaller when I try." Another house was condemned after a real estate agent entered and failed to return. Search teams found her sitting in what used to be a bathroom, now transfigured into a 5-story atrium filled with bookshelves, none containing text. Just blank pages, hundreds of them, all stamped with the same raised seal, a city skyline with no name. The Foundation began mapping the interior geometries of these corrupted homes. Attempts were futile. The blueprints shifted during transit. Digital scans decayed files corrupted in ways that defied explanation. One aerial drone, when deployed, recorded interior spaces that violated physical law. Vertical gardens inverted on ceilings, furniture grown from walls like tumor growths, windows leading into more houses, each smaller and darker than the last. The phenomenon was named recursive residential collapse. A misapplication of containment protocol had allowed SCP-184 to express its influence in a populated environment. Though the object itself had been recontained quickly, its imprint lingered like fingerprints pressed into wet cement. Spatial trauma, they called it, or architectural residue. Those affected suffered from environmental memory distortion. Their dreams became floor plans. They navigated their own apartments with unease. One survivor, an elderly man, was recorded whispering in his sleep, "Don't go through the kitchen wall. It doesn't like when you remember the wrong room." Psychologists noted that memory was not simply altered, it had been rewritten in architectural terms. Emotional trauma expressed as broken beams, regret encoded in lopsided thresholds, whole identities now arranged like floor plans, the past remembered as a place, not a sequence. One unsettling correlation began to emerge. Survivors reported frequent sightings of a single spiral staircase, recurring in both dreams and hallucinations. It always appeared in the same way, suspended in midair, shadowless, and lit from below by a soft gold glow. No one could explain where it led, but all claimed the same phrase haunted them after waking. This is where the architect begins again. The Foundation's cleanup efforts included neural conditioning, environmental demolition, and, in extreme cases, induced amnesia. But scars remain. Homes were razed, memories erased. And somewhere, beneath Site-37, a single steel sphere continues to whisper impossible blueprints into the fabric of reality. It doesn't need to move. It only needs to remember. Containment has always been a lie. That's what Dr. Helena Tress muttered into her recorder during her last cognitive evaluation. Containment is just architecture dressed as confidence, she whispered. And SCP-184 doesn't obey architecture. It edits it. At Site-37, the sphere was housed in a reinforced polyhedral chamber, suspended in a gyroscopic magnetic field meant to simulate zero-point isolation. It did not touch the ground. It did not move. The room was vacuum-sealed, acoustically dampened, cognitively shielded, and guarded under Level 4 environmental security protocols. But it kept changing, not the object. The room, subtle at first, a light fixture missing from yesterday, a tile not quite flush with the rest. Then came the lengthening hallways, the widening corners. Surveillance footage became impossible to sync. Rooms doubled back into themselves. Maps became fiction. Doors reappeared. Staff reported déjà vu layered over anxiety. Some saw shadows cast by objects not in the room. One guard described hearing footsteps on the ceiling of the observation chamber, soft, bare, and rhythmic, like someone building a cathedral above us with their feet. They replaced the entire structure, poured new foundations, recalibrated every sensor, but the distortions resumed within weeks. Dr. Tress proposed an unpopular theory. SCP-84 wasn't transforming space. It was infiltrating the idea of containment itself. "We treat containment as a fortress," she said. "But it's actually a narrative, and 84 rewrites narratives, especially ones that claim to hold it still." That same month, 3 personnel on site drafted identical reports of internal layout inconsistencies, without consulting each other. Each used the same metaphor in their notes. The hallways are looping like thoughts. The Foundation's internal AI, Pandora, detected recursive structural changes in the documentation network itself. Building schematics were found to have spontaneous additions, rooms with no physical equivalent, labeled with terms like memory well, semantic stair, and cognitive bay. When cross-referenced against existing databases, these terms had no origin. They simply appeared. It was as if SCP-184 had begun constructing itself in language. Then the dreams began. Personnel throughout Site-37 reported identical recurring visions. A circular city, built inward, endless and spiraling. Towers of forgotten moments. Streets paved in doubt. At the center, a domed chamber filled with echoing silence, and floating at its heart, a perfect silver sphere. Each dream ended with the same phrase, unspoken but clear. This is not where you are. This is what remembers you. One junior researcher, after his sixth identical dream, submitted a formal request to transfer to Antarctica. His reasoning: the geometry here feels hungry. Containment, at this point, became a ritual more than a function. The protocols remained in place, layers of magnetic suspension, mimetic dampeners, reality anchors. But the Foundation knew. Deep down, they knew. SCP-184 was not contained, it was nested. Nested in the architecture of their thinking, in the design of their defense, in the walls of their logic, which it quietly curved when no one was looking. One final incident confirmed this. During a late-night audit of the SCP archive, an automated formatting system flagged inconsistencies in the file for SCP-184. Embedded in the page source was a hidden spatial rendering, a floor plan, meticulously detailed. It showed the layout of a structure, a sprawling, multi-dimensional interior space. 22 rooms, corridors that shifted shape depending on the viewer's emotional state, staircases that led both up and backward. Room 112 was labeled simply Dr. Tress's office. When traced back, it was discovered that no one had uploaded the file. No server logs, no user ID, no data trail, just a blueprint that remembered her before she existed. The file was deleted. And yet, it returns every 72 hours. Not as a copy, but as an updated version, refined, expanded, closer to completion. Some say it's still building. Others say it's just waiting for the Foundation to realize something unbearable. They are not the custodians of SCP-184. They are rooms within its memory. The Foundation had no vocabulary for this. They had dealt with the abstract before entities made of data, thought forms, self-erasing anomalies. But SCP-184 was a different kind of infection. It did not lash out. It did not consume. It simply rewrote the stage. And because it was silent, because it altered not what was but how one knew it, its effects went unnoticed until they were irreversible. Site-37 became a pilgrimage of containment theorists, not because it was successful, but because it had failed so elegantly. Dr. Matthias Rohn, a spatial-temporal analyst, was brought in to redefine the containment paradigm. He did not speak in terms of rooms or force fields. Instead, he proposed an ontological scaffold, a map not of physical placement, but of conceptual distance. We must hold 184 in a thought that has no adjacent thoughts, he wrote. His proposal, an isolation grid based on semantic entropy, layers of misdirection, abstract naming systems, recursive documents filled with false trails, all designed to disorient the anomaly, to trap it in a paradox of identity. The object's official designation was changed. Multiple fake files were seeded through Foundation servers. Floor plans were randomized hourly. Names of rooms were swapped. The containment wing was no longer a place. It was a moving absence, defined only by what it was not. For 3 months, the distortion slowed, not stopped, but slowed, enough for hope to blossom. Then, in mid-autumn, the sphere moved, not spatially. It remained in its vacuum cradle. But when viewed through multidimensional topology renderings, its internal position shifted. The sphere did not change coordinates. The world around it had moved. One junior architect, tasked with updating schematics of the wing, quit after seeing his own apartment's layout appear within the substructure's expansion path. He described it as being drawn toward a place that shouldn't know my name. Security logs began to loop. Personnel were listed as present in multiple locations simultaneously. Voices could be heard before their owners arrived. And worse, some voices belonged to individuals never cleared for the site. One such incident involved an audio feed in Observation Chamber 2, wherein two researchers discussed the completion of the central atrium. The names listed in the transcription, Dr. Laurel Nemez and technician Harris Vale, were not in the system. Facial recognition confirmed no match, yet they spoke with authority, with familiarity, as if they'd always been part of the project. When played backwards, their voices formed a three-dimensional spectrograph. The resulting image, a tower, its base labeled Initiation, its apex labeled Return, and floating at the center, as always, a sphere. This was no longer a question of how to contain SCP-184. It was now a question of whether they were still outside it. Containment logs began referencing hallways that had not been built. Psychological screenings revealed high instances of dream overlap among staff. In one particularly harrowing case, 3 guards described waking up inside the object, navigating an endless spiral staircase made of mirrored ceilings and wet carpet. "It wasn't a dream," one muttered in his debrief. "It was a draft. I was a revision." The O5 Council called for partial evacuation of Site-37, not because of danger. There had been no aggression, no losses, no structural collapse, but because something had started watching them back, from walls that held no eyes, from thresholds that had no other side. Even outside the facility, reports continued. A containment architect, reassigned to Site-19, began to sketch the floor plan of his own quarters during sleep. He did not recognize the handwriting. When scanned, the floor plan matched the southern sub-basement of Site-37, which he had never seen. Noted at the bottom of the page, Room 184C, suggested ingress, memory. Reality, they came to realize, was no longer a line. It was a blueprint in revision, annotated by an unseen hand, crossing out rooms, sketching new ones in margins, drawing corridors between ideas instead of bricks. The final attempt to relocate SCP-184, transferring it to a spatially isolated offshore lab, failed before it began. Not because of interference, but because no one could agree on where the sphere was. Each map was different. Each team swore they had seen it. Every camera showed a perfect void. A final note from Dr. Rohn, before he self-terminated his own Foundation credentials and vanished into a labyrinth of corridors no one can confirm were real. "We are not storing 84. We are pages in its autobiography. And it is still learning how to write." There is a threshold we cross in silence, a point beyond which curiosity is no longer a virtue but an infection. SCP-184 is not an object. It is not a thing, not really. It is a direction, a silent instinct crawling toward a perfect shape. The world does not simply hold it. The world is beginning to imitate it. This was the Foundation's final mistake, assuming SCP-184 was a deviation, an aberration, something to be excised from the coherent flesh of reality. But what if it was the first page, the seed geometry of a world never meant to stop growing? Somewhere, there is a tower that no architect drew, a tower that no city permits, a tower that appears not because it was built, but because you looked for it. It's there now, at the edge of the coast, or the center of your hometown, or inside the room you forgot to name. A single staircase rises from its foundation, each step more abstract than the last. Stone becomes chrome, chrome becomes diagram, diagram becomes desire. You may ask, what is at the top? The answer is SCP-184's final lesson. There is no top, there is only ascent, because completion is not its goal, only proliferation, only replication, only the act of designing without end. Testimonies collected from late-stage observers, those affected cognitively or spatially by prolonged proximity, begin to align across multiple reports. Each recounts a similar metaphor. They describe the sensation of becoming an address, not a location in space, but a function, a place that leads to other places, a hallway in someone else's dream, a window inside a forgotten childhood memory, a bridge between waking and some unreal second layer of morning. One researcher, institutionalized after mapping his own dreams, scrawled a final message before disappearing from his room, leaving only a drawn floor plan on the walls. Every time we record its shape, we add a room. Every time we speak of its limits, we define new corridors. We are not the cartographers, we are the blueprints. This is the failing of structure. The myth of containment. SCP-184 cannot be held, because it does not occupy, it defines. It is not the sphere, it is not the alterations, it is not the anomaly. SCP-184 is the act of architecture itself, untethered from purpose, from constraint, from mercy. It is the divine mistake of the first builder, echoed across dimensions, still echoing. And when all buildings are too small, when all maps feel unfinished, when your home begins to stretch in the corners of your memory, that is when you will hear it. Not a sound, not a voice, but a shift, as if the room had just breathed. And then a new door appears, unmarked, waiting, open. Welcome to the Containment Zone, and thank you for visiting the Architect's City.